Thank you very much, Christine, and welcome everyone to Engaging Study Participants After Recruitment. We all haven't figured out exactly where the rest of the titles for this, what you see on the slide, came from, but we are really going to focus on what happens between the clinical research team and the study participants, not so much as we get them to enroll in the studies, but looking at the longer-term relationships in retaining and their compliance with studies as we go through the entire research program. So I think Christine has given us more than enough introduction, so I will skip that piece and we can move on to what we're going to be focusing on this afternoon, though I will reiterate her offer to have people add comments or ask questions on the Q&A session component of the chat function. So I know there are several of you online who are also engaged in the patient and study participant disciplines and really appreciate everybody doing just that, being engaged and participating in our time together this afternoon. There are three areas that we're going to focus on, and Aaron's going to kick us off in just a minute on the concept of engagement 2.0 and really use this to create a context for the rest of the discussion. We'll talk also about life after randomization and looking at what patients' expectations are from the clinical research community and the investigative sites that they are most connected to. We'll also look at issues as it relates to loss to follow-up, where we've seen significant changes in expectations industry-wide about tolerance levels for losing track of patients and some techniques and strategies that we can use to meet these new standards and these new business objectives. As we progress through the discussion, there are three themes that we hope you will to be able to share with you, looking at ways in which tools, techniques, and technologies will all increase our strength in terms of connectivity across the research continuum. So with that, I will turn it on to Aaron and ask him to take us through the first section.
Great. Thanks, Bonnie, and thank you, everybody, for attending. I think that when I talk about Engagement 2.0, we're going to be talking a lot from a social media perspective, and in the spirit of social media, I want to share with you some life stories that have happened with me and how that relates to how we engage with patients today. So as you can see on the screen there, circled to the right is me, and that is my cousin Jenny, who is also circled in that. And Jenny and I used to attend the same nursery school together, and my mother used to drive us to nursery school every day, and from time to time, as cousins do, we get into little bits of arguments, and we'd always ask my mother who was right in their positioning. And so when we do that, my mother would turn around and say to us, guys, different people have different opinions. And so that usually used to get us quiet, though in my mind I always thought that my mother was just saying that because she knew I was right and that Jenny was wrong and didn't want to make that known. The second part to that is when she would pick us up from nursery school, sometimes we would stop off at the candy store, and without fail, we'd always go in there and get a different candy, and without fail, I would always want the candy that Jenny would always pick out, and so I'd always ask Jenny if she'd share her candy with me, and she never would, and we'd get into an argument, and my mother would turn around to us and say, guys, sharing is caring. So I would like to take those 2 points and bring them into sort of the idea of social media. Social media is really about sharing opinions with each other, learning from each other, and that's sort of how we use social media to engage with patients. And then the two ways that we really like to talk about social media in terms of engaging from a healthcare industry perspective is through education and action. Education, from the point of education, patients don't really always understand all that it encompasses a clinical trial, and we can use social media to engage patients in education about what a clinical trial is and everything that is incorporated with it. And then sort of from the action side of things, different initiatives that you can get involved in, different ways that you can work with caregivers, and different ways that you can get involved and start your own initiatives through a social media perspective that can engage patients in the conversation around clinical research. So to start from education, understanding clinical trials. As I said, sometimes patients don't understand fully what all encompasses a clinical trial and all the processes and the IRB approvals that we have to go through. So as you can see, we have, a lot of patients don't understand what an adverse event is, or what a double-blinded study is, or even what a Phase 3 study is versus a Phase 2 study. And you can use social media to educate patients about the differences in clinical trials, and I'll give you a few examples as we move forward. But it's something simple that we like to do on our study pages. When patients come to our study pages, we say, hey, if you like to use social media, that's great, but here's what you need to know from our side of things as to what you can and cannot do from a social media perspective, why it would be bad to unblind yourself in a study and what that would all mean. And then listening and informing and engaging, there are a lot of different patient-driven initiatives that you can get involved in where patients are actually asking for the industry to get involved and collaborate with patients on different initiatives. So again, understanding clinical trials. This is a PDF that we allow people to download off of our websites that explain the entire clinical trial process, and I'm sure there are a lot of different things like this out there, but this is just an example of the one that BBK provides. And again, it's a really simple, easy thing that you can do. It's not really sort of a social media thing at all, but it's a way to engage patients in all that encompasses a clinical research study. And then listening and informing and engaging, as I said. These are two very, very interesting groups. On the left, you have the DSMA, which stands for the Diabetes Social Media Advocacy Group, and they host live Twitter chats online where they talk all about the different aspects of diabetes and the different current events that are going on in diabetes. And again, they're always looking for healthcare industry to participate in these conversations and join these conversations with patients to get both sort of sides of the spectrum, the patient side and the industry side, and to collaborate and to work together to build a better relationship between patients and industry. And the same can be said for the new Prostate Cancer InfoLink social network. Again, that is another type of social network that encourages the healthcare industry to join in the conversation with patients, and I would certainly invite you guys to check those two organizations out. From the action side, and this is sort of the side that I get most excited about being a marketer, I like to take action. So promoting advocacy group initiatives, what we can do with caregivers, and again, getting involved and staying involved, building your own initiatives that are really simple and easy and don't require a lot of too much time and effort, but really go a long way from the patient side of things. The one thing with social media that we've seen is that patients just want you to be involved in the conversation. That's what they're looking for. So we'll show you a few initiatives that have been started outside of BBK that we find to be very interesting, where you see patients and industry collaborating together. So I don't know how many people are familiar with Foursquare, but just to kind of get everybody up to speed, Foursquare is kind of a combination of MapQuest, TripAdvisor, and sort of the calendar section of a newspaper where you can learn about different events that are going on, different restaurants that are new to the area, and so forth. And we've, at BBK, started this program called Calling All Types, which is an online diabetes health movement where we support the initiatives of patients who like to use online programs to learn more about their disease and learn to try to manage their condition more effectively. So what we've done with the social network Foursquare is we've just listed all the different types of diabetes events that are available to people, and we list them by months. There was also, I think, a few months ago, a time where there was something called the Diabetes Restaurant Movement, where restaurants decided to change their menus a little bit to be more diabetic friendly, and we highlighted them on our Foursquare page. So again, as we go through this, these are really simple, easy things that you can do to support the initiatives of advocacy groups and patients through social networks and through social media. And again, sort of keeping in theme with the spirit of social media and sharing my experiences with you, pictured on the screen here is my cousin Annie. Annie was diagnosed with Crohn's disease about 10 years ago, and for my senior project in college, I decided to do an awareness campaign, an event around Crohn's disease, and to raise money for Crohn's disease. And one of the ways that I did that was I actually went to school for music management, and I used to manage a band called Chill Set. They're a fun little band out of the Boston area. I don't know how many people on the phone are in the Boston area, but you should check them out. Well, what I did was, at school, I set up a Facebook page that generated awareness about my initiative and about Crohn's disease. And once I got past the question of will there be beer at my event, because I was in college, people really wanted to start to learn more about Crohn's disease and wanted to learn about more ways to get involved. So again, really simple, easy things that you can do to support this initiatives of different diseases and things of that nature. Again, more with caregiving, I just want to highlight a few companies. As was said before, I used to work for Patients Like Me. It's an incredible place for patients to go and collaborate with other patients like them and learn more about managing their disease. And the other one that I want to highlight here and Inspire is very much like that. Lots of helping hands. This is a place typically used by families for patients that need a lot of support. It's private patient communities that are set up, and what they do is they set up calendars for visits to doctors, or if a patient needs a trip to the grocery store or whatever it may be, they set up these calendars within this social network so that people are always constantly involved in the process of taking care of the patient whenever they need to. And Fox Trial Finder is a little bit of a new one, though it's starting to gain more traction. It's really all about clinical research and supporting the efforts of clinical research when it comes to Parkinson's disease. So I definitely say to check these different social networks out. And finally, for social media action, to get involved and to stay involved, these are a couple of different programs that were set up. One is called the Diabetes Nest. This was actually started by Roche, and basically all it is it's a Twitter feed, which is sort of like an online chat forum. Patients can come to this site. They can add their Twitter profile into this site and meet other patients and talk about diabetes. And this is a feed that constantly changes so that people can come on and share their stories and share their initiatives with other people who also have diabetes. And the other one that I'd like to highlight is the Minute Clinic, which was started by CVS, and they host chats on their Facebook page about different diseases and different things that are going on in the healthcare industry and connecting patients with industry. So which is a very, very cool initiative that people can get involved in. So just kind of to summarize again, education and action. The more we help patients become informed, the more empowered they feel to enter clinical research studies and to be a part of the conversation and to participate. So we definitely want to use social media as an opportunity to engage with patients. And again, get involved, stay involved. I know there's a lot of negative connotation on the healthcare industry side when it comes to social media, but as we've seen in some of these examples, there are great ways that you can get involved in the conversations, start your own initiatives, and be a part of patients' lives within the social media realm. So with that, I'd like to hand it back over to Bonnie, and thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Aaron. I think to help with the transition there, why did we start with this review of the options that are available to you in an online environment? And it's really connected to what it is that patients want. they want these relationships with you, and the more they understand what we're doing in clinical research, the more we have the chance for these volunteer participants to be fully engaged in this scientific effort that we're all participating in. So lots of times we can talk about those things theoretically and say, yes, you can teach people more about clinical research, and people will nod their heads and say, yes, 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 we do that. Or we can solve all of the study enrollment problems in the world if people just appreciated more about clinical research. I'm not quite sure that's true, but I do know that for those who are already considering participation or who are at the beginning stages of a conversation with an investigator or study coordinator, the more we teach and share about the key principles of the scientific method, the key principles of clinical research, the better off we are in terms of meeting our long-term goals for study participant retention, the quality and access to a valuable data, and the other pieces that represent success and accuracy and quality in clinical research. So that's why we felt that was important, because these are specific actions, as Aaron said, one of my favorite lines, I'm a marketer, so I like to take actions. These are the kinds of actions that you can take, and not one of those was really protocol specific. So there's a great deal of conversation now of what is it that we can share with study participants, what might they share with each other when we're in an online environment. Will all of these conversations encourage people to step away from their commitments? And you know, these approaches meet both sides of the equation. On the one hand, it demonstrates to study participants that you're caring about them, that you're engaged in this process, that it's part of your mission as an organization. So whether you're a hospital or you're a lab or a sponsor, whatever it may be, there are things that the study participants want to know from you. And because they're not protocol specific per se, they also allow you to have conversations in a way that may feel less threatening from your legal and regulatory perspective, or operationally overwhelming from the clinical team perspective. So I'm no David Letterman if I haven't already demonstrated that, but I still want to share with you the top 10 things that study participants want from the sponsors and the investigators that have invited them into and encouraged them to participate. So if this goes forward the way I would like it to, I guess this system doesn't take the animation. So let's just look at it from the bottom up. The number 10 thing that people are looking for is timely reimbursement of their cost to participate. And I know that seems like such an unimportant thing as we look back up to point number 1. But being part of a team is really being about respect and exchange of information and value. So we'll go from the sublime to not quite ridiculous, but really very concrete ideas here. So number 1, people participate in clinical research and expect from their investigative sites the opportunity to be part of a team that is working for a cure. Now, many, many people are hoping that cure will be available to them through the study or in their lifetimes, but, in general, people appreciate that timeline may not always work directly for them, but it is part of what drives them. They're looking to be respected, and I think we can never be reminded too often about the fact that these individuals are contributing both their bodies and their minds, their attentiveness, to the protocol compliance, their attentiveness to sharing information, the adverse events or any other symptoms that they may be experiencing. And I think we do forget that from time to time. As I mentioned before, people are looking for an opportunity to improve their health. That's slightly different than that cure. And when you survey patients after they've participated in a research study, 80-some-odd% will say they want to do it again or would be willing to, because they felt that they got better care and attention, and got more time from the medical community than they would get otherwise. People want information about what's happening with the research study. They may just want to know how many total patients have been enrolled. They want to know how many countries are participating. They're interested in being treated as if they're part of the research team in that regard. They're looking for ongoing access to physicians who are committed to new treatment options and investing their time and their energy in developing new treatments. And that translates also to a sense that your investigators are, they're smarter, they're more driven, they're not resting on their laurels. These are all things that are important to study participants. Appreciating contributions of time and effort, protection from undue harm or risk. And even though that topic is often the thing that gets the media attention, it's not at the top of the list for patients and study participants when we're talking with them. I think not because it's not important, but I think because the actual participants believe that they're well cared for in that regard. Transparency, openness, frank conversations, an opportunity to connect with other people living with their disorder, which is why some of these ideas that Erin talked about are in a relatively easy and important way for us to contribute to the satisfaction of our research volunteers. I just want you to know that none of you have put any questions or comments yet into that chat field, so I'm going to encourage you to do that once again. And even if it's just an opinion rather than a question, we do want to hear from you. At the core of all of these, or the theme running through each of these top 10, is the idea of communications. And I'll reiterate this probably again and again, that the understanding the principles of the scientific method and having study participants who understand what data integrity is and why studies are structured in the way that they are, and why it's so important for the study participant to tell the investigator anything that comes to their mind as they're participating in the study. For example, lots of times they may feel to be like they're not study-related questions, but if you're thinking about what was the most difficult aspect of being in this study, whether it's this week or this month, since the last study visit, how are you feeling about it? What was hard about it? These are easy questions to add in, but really form the powerful basis for relationships, and that's at the core of engaging participants after recruitment. That's at the core of retention and quality of valuable data. Did any new questions occur to you since now that you've finished this first month of participation? We talked through the risks, we talked through the point of the study and the objectives of the study at the point at which you signed on for this. Now that you've been in it for a while, now what questions do you have? Now how are you feeling about it? And I know lots of investigators get concerned about that idea. Well, we don't want to open Pandora's box. We've already got their consent. But in terms of true engagement and true retention, these are not things that make it worse. These are kinds of questions that make the relationship stronger and make things better. One of the other ways that we can evaluate how well we have done as communication, on the communication side, and by we I mean the entire clinical research group, whether it's the investigator, coordinator, sub-Is, whatever it may be. Has anyone asked you a question about being in this research study? And if so, how did you answer that? What were the important things that you wanted to share with people about it? They may not all be positive, but I think you'll be surprised the percentage of them that really are. And that's another way of getting the study participant to say aloud what's important to them and what's valuable. And you can see how that would help imprint the idea that they are making an informed decision to continue to participate, which is as important as that initial decision to be screened for study participation. And all of these things, these approaches to communication, end up building trust. And without trust, it's very difficult to get the truth that you need in terms of data. So we know there are lots of patients who don't talk about ways in which they miss their medication schedule, or their worries about a symptom that they may not think has anything to do with the study, and they don't want to worry or stress the doctor. Or they don't tell us about things that would be considered an adverse event, or even sometimes a serious adverse event. Sometimes because they don't want to be taken off the study, or sometimes because they don't want to upset or offend the doctor. But the extent to which we have a strong connection and the patient participants trust the investigators as well as the coordinators, we really do ourselves a service in terms of the quality of the data that's collected from these participants. From a logistical perspective, there's lots of new tools and resources that can be used to improve this aspect of engagement and retention. There are new technologies that we can use to remind patients of upcoming visits. There's text messaging and services such as that. There's outbound phone mail or email or postal mail. There are all kinds of ways that we can connect up with patients, but the most important thing is for us to make sure that we're communicating with them in the means that's most comfortable for them. So we can be doing it with young parents in an ADHD study, and everything wants to be automated and online or SMS messaged, or we can be talking to older patients in a cardiovascular disease study, and they may want you to call them or call their daughter who's driving them to the appointments. And while we're at appointments, one of the things that you hear for patients who are not participating in clinical studies, but those who do as well, please don't make people wait. And then don't wait for the visit to start. Don't wait for them to be reimbursed. Don't wait for them to have their phone calls returned. These other expressions, these are kind of basic, but we miss the mark on these issues so often that they bear repeating. So these are, that's another level. To bring it back around to what Erin was talking about, we have good relationships with people who provide us with resources. They teach us things, they make connections for us, they give us support. And so much of the online environment and Engagement 2.0, these resources exist, and it's about making those connections, not creating content from the beginning. One technique that we find increasingly picked up by more investigator sites, this is particularly true outside the U.S. We're having a harder time getting this idea accepted inside the U.S. but to identify one person on the study team inside the investigator site who's going to serve as the sort of ombudsman or the liaison for that patient participant with the study. And historically, that kind of role has been left just to the study coordinators. And as a result, when it's all concentrated on one person, it tends to become more about logistics and not about building a deeper relationship that gets to the issues of study information and study data. Many coordinators, many scheduling secretaries, et cetera, do a terrific job of remembering people and their families and what's important to them, but getting that ratcheted up a level into the medical or the scientific connection is an important thing. And the other point I would make here is that kind of work takes time and energy, and no one person on a clinical team can serve as that liaison for each patient. And even if it doesn't mean you're calling out to them, it means you've identified yourself to the study participant as their in-site advocate and their in-site point of triage, any concerns that they have. As a group, the study team then should meet once a month to really address, once people are begun to be enrolled, you don't have to wait for everybody to be enrolled. Once people have begun to be enrolled in the study, meet once a month and talk about to what extent do we believe this study participant is attached to the study itself, attached to our research site. What are we doing well? Why are they attached? Are we losing ground with that participant? And why? And what might we do about that? Did I say earlier that sometimes I'll remind you about the basics? Smile, remember people's names, say thank you. Now I'd like to turn things over to the third area of our discussion, and that is how things have evolved in the arena of loss to follow-up or long-term follow-up with study participants. And we've really seen significant changes in the standards for participant retention. Once upon a time, study teams would project somewhere between 10, 15, even as high as 20% withdrawal rates, with a minimum focus on differentiating between whether the patient withdrew consent, whether they were actually lost to follow-up, or whether there was a medical withdrawal. You'd really have to dig a little bit deeper into the data set to understand how that was breaking out. Cardiovascular event monitoring in a pre-Vioxx era didn't go on for 3 to 5 or more years in a compound that wasn't focused on cardiovascular disease. Information about patient privacy and privacy regulations, which continue to be promulgated, were less rigorously applied, especially between the patient and physician. So here's an example. I don't know, it looks like most of you are here in the U.S., but you'll go into any doctor's office for the first time or into a hospital or emergency room, and as you're doing your registration, they're going to ask you to sign off on a HIPAA. I'm getting a question in from Elizabeth. No, we're not seeing any questions in the Q&A pod, so maybe we have to check that, Elizabeth, or you can send us a note about why that might be happening. So we're asked to sign some kind of a HIPAA waiver, HIPAA authorization. So I would say maybe 6 times out of 10, the person who's asking you to do this doesn't hand you the document itself. You're asked to sign something that says you've received it, but you really haven't. And then if you ask people to explain what's the principle of HIPAA and what does all of this mean, it's shocking to me the percentage of people who can't answer that question and really don't understand what patient privacy means. So, this is what I'm talking about, too, when I say even between a patient and physician, if you're a physician practice or you're an investigator practice, doesn't understand some of these concepts and isn't able to have an open conversation with patients about what happens with their information and their data, then, you've lost an opportunity there. But that was common. And then people rarely felt as if they were volunteers. They were treated and they were used this word subject. Being a subject in a research study wasn't the same as being a volunteer. And today, it looks quite different. Whoops, too many pages. Today, it's not uncommon for us to see a study team set a loss to follow-up rate of less than 1 to 2%. I'm working on two cardiovascular studies right now. Each of them has more than 10,000 patients. And the tolerance for losing touch with patients or their caregivers if people have passed away was 0 for a 10,900 patient study and up to 9 for a study in 72 countries with 12,800 participants. And this is over a 5-year long-term follow-up phase for the study. So if you had asked me would I have anticipated that 5 years ago, no, I really wouldn't. But this is how significantly we've seen the changes. We also now have privacy regulations that speak directly to these issues of who gets access to it, how can information be transferred, when and how can it be stored, how can it be shared, when does it have to be destroyed, and all of that connects up, as we'll look in just a minute, at the idea of staying in touch with study participants. And I think one of the greatest things that we've done as an industry and a clinical research community is to make good progress in countries all over the world of people coming to understand that they are participants in clinical research in clinical research studies and not just subjects, that they are volunteers. And in large measure, I think, due to the online environment and the internet, healthcare consumers in general and study participants among them feel as if they have a lot more control about their approaches to healthcare, and the patients have more control about and exercise that control in their selection of research opportunities and research options. So, that's another thing that we see people withdraw from studies because they're interested in pursuing, a different line of exploring a different line of treatment. And we see that particularly in oncology or other long-term degenerative diseases like MS or Parkinson's, to name a few. So one of the things I'd like to recommend to you if you do have a long-term study is to develop what we call a participant contact matrix. And it's something that we really need the site's buy-in on because only they can to make this happen. So you have at the center the participant and that participant's contact details. But who else will the participant allow you to contact if you've lost track of them? And we have people moving so often within a country and internationally, and even in countries like Spain and Italy, where historically people lived in the same community for generations. We're seeing real changes in migration patterns. So, can we get written approval either in the ICF itself, or in a supplemental ICF that speaks just to issues of contact? Can we get information about their family member or couple of family members that would be backup contacts? We'll typically collect information about the primary care provider, but can we reach out to that individual under certain circumstances? In some countries, the employers are another way in which we can stay connected to patients if we've lost track of them. And in many cases, we also see patients that will share the name of an attorney or some other professional representative of them or their families. And these are the kinds of things that we do when, when all else fails, when we've lost track of people. This is a process that we use to, a sponsor will authorize us to get focused in a particular country, and we review the informed consent document for that country, evaluate the regulations, and the patient privacy and patient contact regulations are changing so significantly. And there's wide variability in countries like Canada, where now there's a national layer that is supposed to replace the provincial layers of privacy, but that's only true in 7 provinces in Canada, and the other provinces all have both layers that need to be complied with. Every country in Europe ostensibly is connected to the same EU directive and other privacy issues, but they're layers country by country. So to this, I'm not quite getting to the question of how often we should connect, but we have some obligations, I think, to being able to connect, and that's what we're talking about right here. So this is just outlining a process that we go through if we're in the position where we've actually totally lost track of study participants, and then following back up with the sites to provide them with that patient contact information. To your question about how often, let me come back to that. To your question about how often, I think that's going to be a function of the protocol itself, the age, and by that maybe the most important piece is the age of the individuals that are participating and the frequency of the study visits, as well as the overall length term of a patient participation. So if you have a study that's a 12-week with, screening visit and then weekly visits for the 12 weeks and then a 30-day follow-up call, your primary communication should be in those face-to-face study visits. So the important piece then would be to make sure that people are attending the study visits, and the emphasis on the communication should be the logistical, getting people there, and then taking time to invest in relationship communications during those study visits. If you have one of these 3 to 5 year studies and people are coming for a visit every quarter or every 6 months, then you're much more dependent on these sort of outbound communications in order to stay connected to the study participant. So the strategy for that kind of a protocol would be very different. If they're young people, you need to stay in touch with them even more often. That may be a little counterintuitive, but younger people are more transient in many, many cultures, and they have a tendency to jump in and get involved in something, and then if they've lost touch with you over a few weeks, they may not even remember that part, whereas that's less true of older adults who may feel the participation in a clinical research study is a major investment. It's one of the things that they are doing. And so it really is going to vary. It's going to vary by protocol on the criteria that I mentioned a little bit earlier. I wouldn't consider anything going more than 90 days. If you've gone 90 days without some kind of telephone, study visit, outreach letter or connection, offering up people an opportunity to be on a web call such as this, where you don't know who one another is and the study participants don't need to know that either. There's lots of choices that you can use, but I wouldn't let 90 days go by without a conversation with a study participant in addition to the study visit. Do we have any other questions on those categories? Okay. So where I had intended to go next was just to give you an example of the kinds of things that we're dealing with from a legal and regulatory framework, where we have these overarching privacy protection regulations, and this is just a page I pulled from, one analysis for Mexico as a country, and it's important that the investigators, that the monitors, the CRO if you're working with them, as well as the clinical study team, and often the legal team at the sponsor, has a good handle on what are the issues, what are the guidelines and the regulations and the principles that underlie them as it relates to privacy. I think when you drill down into it, you see, going back to one of the earlier questions about how do you engage in social media without being in conflict with these, or how do you follow up with patients without being in conflict with these regulations, really is about demystifying it, breaking these points apart, and not just assuming that nothing can be done or should be done, but rather looking at the principles of sharing information and reminding participants of the voluntariness of clinical research participation, the deliberation and the deliberateness of their decisions to participate, are all really both strong relationship builders and critical ethical and moral obligations that we have as a research community. So one thing is just making sure that we understand them. But here's a simple thing that I've seen in some informed consents or we've advised people to include, particularly if you're concerned about losing patients to follow-up. Just put a paragraph such as this: following your active participation, the doctor, one of the staff members will follow up, and if we can't, if you've moved or otherwise we've lost track of you, we may provide your information to a third party to help to find your current contact information. Not to find you or contact you, but to get your most up-to-date contact information. And that's been particularly powerful. These approaches have been particularly powerful in meeting these new standards or obligations in terms of not having patients lost to follow-up. All right, so we go. I think we've covered that. I think, in closing, and Erin and I understood we had about 60-some-odd minutes for presentation and the balance for questions. So we're here at the end of what we wanted to present in a formal way. Ultimately, it's all about people and communication and disciplining ourselves to own that, and to own those activities and those responsibilities, and just not assume that because it's obvious, it's being done well, or it's being done in ways that ultimately protect the entire investment in the research enterprise. So thank you for your participation to this point.